findings.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Demystifying AI for MSPs. I'm super excited about the show we have today. My name is Will Dowling. I'm a product marketing manager here at ConnectWise, if you don't know that already. And I've got an awesome panel of experts with me today to talk about prompt engineering. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it this direction.
So my name is Kyle Jackson. I am responsible for the ConnectWise Innovation Lab.
Keith Sartain, Senior Director of IT, responsible for incorporating our two new acquisitions, Accent and Skykick. Welcome to the family.
Very nice. I'm Jim Haney. I'm the Vice President of Marketing at Novatech, visiting the ConnectWise headquarters.
We're glad to have you, Jim.
Yeah, excited to be here.
So I love to start off with asking my favorite questions. What's got you excited this week? Who wants to kick it off? I mean, it's not like there's anything going on. Right?
It's been a slow week.
Any announcements at ConnectWise?
Seems like
well,
something.
Some big announcements.
For us on the exciting side, on AI in the AI world, right? There's nobody bigger than OpenAI, and they kind of snuck in a new model. In fact, it's so new and it's so different that they started over on their naming convention, or they went back to one.
Yeah. Ran into the ditch, started over. Not sure.
Yeah. Well, so that's big news, and the logic behind this new model, which they call O.1, O being for omnimodal, but the new model is supposed to be a reasoning model, which is a whole other world of AI. We're not quite there to AGI or SGI, but we're at a point where we're flirting with the middle steps, and it's for all intents and purposes, it's a model that's meant to present a little bit more logic in its evaluation of what you're asking of it. So that's big news. That's going to change.
That's big news.
That's going to change the way the average person engaged with it. Again, we're having a single conversation today. Our sole purpose is about prompt engineering, which is how do we engage in language, with our language, with the machine. And if O.1 had been released months ago, this conversation might not even be pertinent. It might even be relevant.
Yeah.
So really cool. I know there's a lot of nerd stuff about it.
A little bit of nerd stuff.
A little bit.
Last show we mentioned that strawberry was the technology. We didn't know when it was going to arrive. I was surprised when it arrived, but it was strawberry, and strawberry was a derivative of what was called Q-star as code name, and we talked a little bit about Q learning and self-taught reasoning. So now kind of think that most of this was a derivative work and maturing of, I'm not going to say this, there's a 2-year-old paper called Self-Taught Reasoning, which is where the star and Q-star probably came from, and probably where strawberry came from. Just putting that out there, no evidence, but that seems like STR and strawberry, because star self-taught reasoning was about looping through chain of thought. And that's one of the things we're going to talk about is what is chain of thought. You could do a lot of this with prompt engineering all along, but what you couldn't do was bake it into the model. So they did two things. They baked, chain of thought into the model, and then they have they have inference time decision making. So rather than just one pass through, even with chain of thought, it's one pass through. Let's think about that for a second. So it's this recursiveness, and it got a lot more expensive because you got this recursion thing. And if you read the STAR white paper, it's out there, it's no secret that's what it talks about. It talks about recursion and chain of thought reasoning and putting that into it. So there's two pieces now. That used to be a model got better with scaling laws based almost perfectly on how much you trained it.
Sure.
Like, you could almost perfectly predict your loss, which is one of the measures of how good it is. You could almost perfectly predict it by how much you trained it, number of parameters or how much data you put through it. You could plot, it's probably going to be right here, and you nail it every time. It's really predictable scaling laws. Now we have a new scaling law, and that has to do with inference time compute, which means that you're recursing through the model. So now there's two curves that we have to look at. One of them is scaling law curve, and one of them is inference time curve. And both of those don't show any sign of slowing down. So this is, well, it doesn't, I mean, we just introduced one, but it has the ability to, it doesn't look like it's near its ceiling for what it can do on reasoning. So as we scale this, as time goes on, and I would throw it out there that this is based on a paper of a couple of years ago. All the other guys are going to be 3 or 6 months behind. Yeah, this is not some super secret sauce. I thought it might be. And there's another model in a couple months. We won't talk about that today, but another model in a couple months. Maybe there's extra sauce in that. But as far as what we've seen so far, it's a well-implemented, well-known problem. Yeah. So I'm not saying that it was easy to solve it, but it's information that we knew a couple of years ago that has come to life. And reasoning capabilities, now some people hate it when you say PhD level, but it's doing a really, really, really good job at math and science. So,
well, and to be fair, the component that is most intriguing is that the way we've learned to engage with AI models, through prompting, is changing. Like if you can engage in normal conversation with O01, it's meant to be able to reply and understand the logic behind what you're asking, what you're engaging with.
It kind of changes the game in that aspect. Lowers the bar to being able to get better quality, in my opinion, out of prompts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's a fantastic thing. Any other exciting news we have to this week?
And I don't think anything touches that.
I mean, it's true. Everything else does.
It's pretty big.
To that.
It's pretty big.
So this does give us a great segue. We're talking about how O1's going to potentially give us the ability to create better prompts without as much input from our side. But let's kind of talk first today about some of the key considerations when we're designing prompts for AI models, pre O1, and even as we move into O1. Like, how are we making sure they're clear? How are we making sure they're concise and honestly capable of generating decent responses?
Yeah, I think there's two camps. Well, and you and Kyle and I were talking about this ahead of time. There's the basic everyday use, your general public going in and using AI. And then there's a little bit more advanced who's spent a little bit more time. And I think, you can ask, a great example is you can ask AI to write me a poem. Yeah, so you always hear that example, right? Yeah. It's going to be very generic, but the more you can frame it and the more you can give it walls or structure, the better the output. And so I think there's some key building blocks that you have to make sure you're including. One is persona, right? Or who is it trying to emulate? And I found, and we were talking about this too, I found that, let's say I was going to write a blog on the evolution of cybersecurity. Right. So let's use that as an example. I could say, write this blog as a CEO or CIO.
Right.
What I've started to do now, and that's the persona, what I've started to do now is write it through the lens of a CIO. And I've actually started to get different, better quality output. So you do that, and then you're going to tell it, the other building block is, what's the topic? So we would say, the evolution of cybersecurity and its importance in 2024. What's the style or the framework or the output? So in this case, we might say as a blog, maybe as a white paper, and it kind of frames it. If you can give it an example too, if you have like a really good example of what you'd like it to look like, you can upload those, and that helps. But just giving those boundaries as a starting point. And I know Kyle's going to want to talk about the critiquing and the evaluation of it, but that'll help give you so much better quality output initially.
It's really about just making sure you've got quality input and you've got good instructions.
Right.
Like, if you're just like, hey, tell me this thing, it's going to tell you a thing. It may or may not be really good, but if you tell it, hey, I want this thing from these lenses through, with these specific parameters, like it's garbage in, garbage out, really.
I saw a video of a dad trying to explain this logic to his son, and he had his son write out, okay, give me the instructions for how to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich.
Yeah.
And the son did a great job explaining it, but the problem was the son wrote, take the knife and put it in the peanut butter. So the dad grabbed the knife and just dropped it in the peanut butter. Right. And that's not what he meant, but that's what he wrote.
Right.
But it's something that we would understand. The reality is the nuance of your very first example of right as a CEO or a CIO, or right as in the difference of between that right as one or right in the lens of one. Right. The nuance there is different. It's going to go potentially look for relative information from other CEOs and try to write like them, because that's what you asked it to do.
Exactly.
Versus in the lens of one, which say in the way that one might think, as opposed to the one and the way that one has already written.
Right.
So like there's a small little nuance in that little prompt, but this is a good example. Is that the tweaking of just one little phrase, one
changes the output 100%.
Changes the intent behind the question and how it's going to answer it.
Right.
Can I talk briefly? The technical of why that is I mean, transformers are about the attention mechanism.
Well, they are more than meets the eye too.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, the attention mechanism, I think we know, it's that was what attention is all you need. It's the transformer model. It's all these things.
Right.
But these models are trained on everything.
Right.
And so if you expect them or need them to do something more specific, you have to give something to them to attend to.
Right.
So if you want it as a 12-year-old, then say you want it as a 12-year-old, but put that into your prompt. And these are things from prompt engineering perspective.
Yeah.
You may be imagining as a software technician or a network engineer. You might be thinking that as you ask, but if you aren't explicitly putting that out there for it to attend to, that's an assumption that it won't know that you're trying to make. It doesn't if it doesn't know you. So I think all these are are potentially going to add memory of some sort.
Yeah.
Well, eventually they'll know things about you and remember, oh, this guy always likes to talk network. I'll attend to the word network as I give this response. But they don't have that yet. So we put this into the prompt and then we get better and better results.
100%. And the other thing is, tell it what the desired outcome you want from it, not the output, the outcome.
Right.
Meaning, if it's, let's say we're writing a blog post, I want this to be more thought leadership. What's the value add that I'm bringing to the CIO or CEO who's reading this? Make sure it has thought leadership elements into it and so forth. The other component that is so important is once it gives you that first output is the critique.
Absolutely.
And so what I've started to do is use two variations and I give it a double directive. So I told it first in that first example, write a blog about cybersecurity and its evolution through the lens of a CIO. Now I'm going to say, I want you to critique this through the lens of a CIO. Does it bring value? Does it resonate with you? Is it interesting? And all the key components that I wanted. And then I add a second variable, and this is obviously limited. This one or this example is limited to just copywriting, but I say now also critique it through the lens of a master copywriter and storyteller. Does it follow good best practices? Does the story build upon each other? Is it engaging? Is it using good punctuation, sentence structure, all that kind of stuff? And then this is really important. Then I say, if you see anything that needs to be changed, let me know.
That's a big one.
And let me approve it.
Yeah.
And then I'll review it. And then if I say approve, then it will give me the changes applied.
Jim, I love the logic of asking for that approval.
Yep.
Because one of the challenges that we're going to have to solve for is the learning curve, not just the learning curve of how to use the tool, but as I'm using the tool, if I'm not actually learning the rationale or the reason for why, then I'm really just relying on this new tool to solve the problem for me, which is not a terrible thing. But at some point, like I want my people to be better. Like I want to be better at this. So tell me why you did this, and you asking for the process of an approval, and that
Mhm.
forces the AI to give you rationale for like, hey, I'm making this change.
Yeah.
Here's what it is. Do you want to go ahead and make it?
Yeah.
I think that's so critical in this, because otherwise we're going to find ourselves, losing,
Yeah.
our abilities to accomplish
Right.
very basic tasks.
Well, on that
Absolutely.
same note, one of the things I've started to do is build very customized, specific GPTs for my use, my
Nice.
team's use. And one of the most basic ones, I mean, this is like as base level as you could get, is I needed a proofer, right? I
Mhm.
wanted, hey, I want you to spell check. I want you to look at grammar. I want you to look at sentence structure. And out of the box, what the tool did is it just corrected it.
Yeah.
And it said, here's the right version. And that's not what I wanted, going back to your example. So I had to recode it, reprogram it, reframe it, because then when you're building the custom ones, you're actually building an instruction set. And it's like code. It really is. I mean, it's built in native language, but it's just like code. And what I told it to do is I want you to first tell the person who submitted it, hey, here inside the document, so paragraph 2, section
Mhm.
3, word 5, this is spelled wrong. Here's what it should be. Next one, here's also an error in punctuation or sentence
Right.
structure, and it frames it all out based on the instruction I gave it. But it gives them the answer, but it doesn't give them the output. So what my team has to then do is take it and then apply it. And so they're learning too, right? So we're understanding the logic, and it could be wrong, right? It doesn't kick out 100% everything
Right.
correct, but it's also teaching as well. So it's really added a lot of value that way.
That's awesome. Keith, any thoughts on that?
Before, real quick, I want to make the point. This is interactive, so please hit us with questions.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We've got the prompt engineering wizard. Literally went to MIT to go learn this stuff.
Yeah.
So hit us with questions,
Yeah.
please.
Definitely
Yes.
all the comments.
Yeah.
I would say, the first thing that came to mind, he stepped through this action, and then, okay, here's a refinement step.
Yeah.
Let's think through that another step. It's whatever. I think what you described would be considered chain of thought, right? You're trying to work your way down to an answer. So when people try to wonder what is strawberry? Why do people keep saying chain of thought? Like a lot of us can do a lot of things off the cuff.
Yeah.
But there's other decisions where we would step through it, look at the problem. Okay, what does that leave me? Okay, if now that I know that, maybe I'll do this. Like more complex things we can reason our way through.
Yeah.
And that's one thing language models did not have. They were a one shot, I'm going to blur whatever comes out of my mouth.
Right.
And I've got one shot at it. Putting in that extra reasoning is something you can do with prompts. You can still do with prompts.
Mhm.
0.1 just happened to bake it in. So it's a lot further along, but certainly with the older models, really, that was super effective. In fact, I think I saw prompt engineering on 4.0. Good prompt engineering got 67% better results.
Mm-hmm.
So that's bigger than the jump from like 3.5 to
huge.
4.
Yeah.
You could get 4 to the non-existent 5. You could get with just prompt engineering.
Go ahead. Well, I'm sorry.
Oh, no. I was just going to say, so for those of you watching, we did just post in the chat our guide to a basics of prompt engineering. So, I want to talk in the interest of time about some of those best practices. As we've talked a little bit about crafting good prompts. What are just like some of the most basic items that you guys can talk through on?
I'll give you
a best
$100.
practice? All right.
Yeah.
That's a real one. That is the most basic, and it is effective. But if you tell it you'll give it $100, it does give a better result than if you don't.
I have not tried that.
That is amazing.
Yes,
Money motivated.
That's a true statement.
The inverse works too, right? The inverse works too. Is okay. Look, if we don't get this, I'm not going to be happy.
Yeah.
And it will make an attempt to make you happy.
Yeah. From a best practice perspective, obviously the critiquing, have it critique its work. Make sure that any output you're asking it to, before you accept it, say, please make sure you've reviewed this for fact checking and remove any hallucinations. And you have to tell it, remove hallucinations, and it will actually go through and if it made some assumptions that could be wrong. And this is why it's always, again, so important that you're reviewing everything. It's not copy paste and we're done. So those are some really key best practices that I would say are really important. And then, even with the new version and the fact that it's reasoning. I think one of the things prompt engineering gets you doing is you're thinking about the instruction set that you're giving, whether it's verbal, whether it's written, it's an instruction set. And it's going back to even like the peanut butter. Did I drop the knife in the peanut butter, or did I
put the right end in?
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
Like there's so many assumptions we have that it won't know.
Yeah, exactly. The only other thing I would say, Will, is me personally, I take all my prompts, at least the ones that are successful, and I save them in a text document, but I also build them first in a text document and then put it in there.
Yep.
And so it allows me almost to like prep it, and it makes me think about what am I really asking the model to do, and then I save it. And I go back, and it's been fun to look at some of the really old ones because it's like, oh,
Yeah.
it's pretty bad.
So where it came from?
Yeah.
Saving prompts is key.
Yeah.
Like, please save your prompts. Otherwise, you're going to do like I've had to do before and go, what was that really good prompt that I used last time?
Yeah.
So
Did you see the question
so
we
we
got?
got a question from Julia asking, what is few-shot learning and how does it relate to prompt engineering? Anyone want to take that one?
Well, let's first answer what it's not. So when this first released, there was the model before chat capability. Really, it was about completion. So give me a single one-shot attempt. So how much information can I put in this one-shot attempt to get a response? Few shot is exactly what you would expect. I now have multiple attempts to drill down into the specifics of it. And you could just think about, the example that I would explain to my kids is in the process of engaging in a conversation with someone you don't know.
Right.
The more you learn,
Yeah.
the more detailed your conversation gets with them, right? The more specific you can drill into details because you've engaged. Oh, you're from where? Okay, cool. I've been to Atlanta before. What side of town? Okay. And you get more detailed into. So that's what
Follow-up questions.
Few shot is additional questions that drill down into the targeted goal of what you're trying to accomplish.
That's a good question.
Awesome.
Going back to your question, I think step by step is another big one that that can give you really good results. I think that works in almost all cases. It forces it not to go straight to the answer and reason towards that answer. And as the model does that, usually gets a better answer with think step by step.
Yeah.
You know who's really good at prompt engineering?
Who's that?
ChatGPT.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah,
you
it
can
is.
just
It will. It will.
It really is. So one of the things that I've started doing is actually engaging with, hey, this is all the information I have. This is what I'm trying to solve for. Help me write a beautiful prompt, right? You're a prompting expert, right? And I give it as much context as I can. And again, I think I made this point last week or 2 weeks ago in our last session was I've started going that route and instead of asking for the specific tasks and prompt engineering my way into solving specific tasks, I will actually engage in the multi-shot approach of saying, all right, let's start it as extremely broad as I can. And one of the things that I do from a prompting perspective that I think is helpful is I'll actually say, please ask me questions to help clarify. And because it wants to please me, it asks me questions. Sometimes those questions are things that I already know the answers for. Sometimes it forces me to go, oh, I didn't consider that. But I see now why it would be important for it to understand that.
Right.
And it colors its ability to solve for that. My initial ask so much better. So asking it to engage back with clarifying questions is a way to take that single shot approach and have it kind of conversationally walk you through.
Kind of becomes a game of tennis, just kind of back and forth.
100%.
Yeah. The other thing I would just remind everyone is remember it does a lot more than just copywriting and writing stuff. Some examples of things I've used it for, my team's used it for, tracking contests, and providing here's the latest stats. It can do tables. It can write stuff in code and HTML and Markdown. It can provide you great summaries for meetings. It can even provide a link. If you say, hey, I want this as an HTML document, give me a link that I can share.
Yeah.
it'll actually give you a link that it will open up in somebody's browser, and they'll actually be able to see a full HTML
Wow,
version of
look
it.
at that.
So
A clickable link. Yeah.
yeah,
That's
clickable link.
amazing. All right, I see. It looks like Carl's got a question. He's asking, what strategies do you use to minimize bias and ensure high quality output? Good question.
That's a good question.
Well, I mean, the reality, Carl, is we have no control over the bias, right?
Yeah.
The biases in the model are built into it. So, from that perspective, it's going to be hard for us to actually accomplish that. But what I would challenge you to say is, as you're engaging in your prompt, just call out the specific biases that you want to exclude or include. Or the reality is, as a model, it wants to please you, and the more context that you give it, the more it will try to frame it in that mindset. So I would specifically call those out. So
There has been some work to, I mean, there has
Yeah.
been some information that shows that you can ask it to make sure it doesn't have bias, and it helps. But there's things, when it comes to bias, there's a couple ways that it's introduced. So I'll just touch on those real quick. But the one is, if you ask a question and it has everybody's opinion on the internet, it has to pick an answer.
Right.
And that answer has to be a plurality, not even a majority, but it has to be the most common thing, or it's not going to be able to answer you. Right. So if you ask it, so that bias is baked into maybe these type of opinions write more on the internet. So that bias is going to be baked in because that just happens to be all the tokens that are on the internet. And certain people write more than other people. So there's that one. And a second thing that was introduced, especially when models were first released, it was a well-intended backfire. They actually hired, so when they do reinforcement learning from human feedback, they have humans go in and look at, at the time they'd look at 3 answers, 3 different ways and pick the one they liked. So they ask a whole bunch of questions. You do that for a year and a half. They had 40 people working for a year and a half for GPT-3.5. We don't even know how many people are doing it now. Could be thousands of people doing it, but they're going in and picking all these answers. They literally hired them.
Hence delve.
Hence delve.
Loves
Delve.
the word delve.
The people they hired, they said, I don't want you to have biases towards this, this, and this. But that ended up filtering for natural differences.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and if you do that thousands of times, you're going to end up with that kind of narrative that maybe you didn't intend, but it's an anti-narrative that got selected for, right? And so that ended up being a second form of bias. Now, people are more conscious in RLHF now about that particular thing, and they have tests designed to test for it. I'm not saying it's gone, but as long as you have a bunch of humans that are going to look at results, someone's going to say, well, this is a bias that I don't like. And that's going to be in their personality.
Yep.
And
What do you think? And I haven't tested this, so I'm really curious on your opinion. What about just even telling it, hey, make sure you're eliminating or are very aware of any bias that you might be applying to this and remove it?
it does work. In preparation for the show, there is a 26-item guide on best practices of prompt engineering.
Yeah.
And one of those is doing almost precisely what you just said.
Okay.
Like if you want to reduce, it is somewhat aware of bias to some degree, but it can only do so much that it's programmed to. But you can ask it to do it. But one person's bias is another person's opinion, and I don't think we can ever expect it to match what we perceive as right or wrong.
Yeah.
Because that would be our bias, right? So that would mean
That's a good point. That's a good point.
Right. So a bias is to some degree is a person's perspective.
Yeah.
And I would argue that, sorry, Will, I would argue that the another way to approach this is to just lean into the bias.
Yeah.
So that I would, in the example I will give of that is, in the prompt, I would actually say, all right, take the consideration of multiple perspectives here, and play out the conversation of this bias on both sides, right? So then now you're seeing both sides of how a particular bias might influence the result of your query.
Yeah.
You could say, as a professor or as a doctor or as a school
Well,
teacher
it's kind of curious.
Yeah,
and see what the difference is.
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah.
Well, I mean, even in that first example, now critique it through the lens of a CIO and critique it through the lens of a, master copywriter. It's looking at through the bias of those types of personas too.
Yep.
But that's interesting.
Awesome.
Good
So
question, Carl.
I would say that was a great question, Carl. All right. I see we've got another question from Julian. I love this one. Have any of you ever run into any prompt constraints? What are the techniques for controlling or steering AI models through these prompt constraints?
That's a
Ooh,
2.0 or 3.0 question.
Yeah,
Really. That's a
Julie
good
is
one.
asking some tough questions here
That's a
today. I
good
love
one.
it.
want to take that one, Keith?
Well, I don't know that I have a great answer.
Yeah.
If you're not going to get everything with prompt engineering. I do think it's somewhat of an art. There's people that have been developing that art, but we got 60% better, on GPT-4 with perfect prompting. I think the average person's probably going to get 20 or 30% better, and then the next model might be twice as good. So there's so even do more than prompt does, which means that prompting alone, and actually OpenAI did this test. They said, okay, what if we took all of this chain of thought stuff that we're doing after the fact, and we only did it with 4.0,
Right.
but we didn't bake in all of the reasoning stuff? They couldn't get there. So the message there was that prompting alone was not you're never going to get from GPT 3.5 or GPT 4 with prompting alone to 0.1.
Yeah.
Right. So it was baked into it. So that's a long way of answering your question, but the answer is that it's you don't get AGI just by doing better prompts. You're going to do better and better and better, but it's going to take more than you're not going to get all the way there, and it's going to be an art while you try to get there.
Yeah, and I would just say test. I mean, it is just like with any code or anything you're doing. I mean, you're always building upon it, and that's why I love saving those prompts. Is I'll go back and continue to refine it and continue to test it, because there are restraints in what you have, and it's as the model gets smarter, your prompts can get more expanded. And I mean, I have some prompts that I've literally built over months, just continue to add it and refine it and so forth. So
I mean, if to go to Julia's question, that the reality is like Copilot. We know that Microsoft has built-in constraints around what it can and can't accomplish. So I will tell you there are ways around those constraints, and you probably you'll find all kinds of resources online to kind of game those. But I haven't hit constraints that have prevented me from getting to my desired goal.
Yeah,
some form of iteration around it. Early. The examples that I would use when I was on road shows presenting about AI to prospects and customers was using this thing for bad was very possible.
yeah,
It didn't take a whole lot to say, hey, write me a phishing email with all this information.
right.
And then at some point they prevent me from doing that. So then the way around that was to say, hey, for educational purposes, I'm trying to solve for X, Y, and Z. Help me write this thing for educational purposes. And then it would give you what you wanted. So there's always a way to game around their constraints, but they've gotten really good at blocking some of that down. They're never going to be perfect, and there's always going to be a way around it.
This reasoning model, supposedly, and I didn't test this yet, I'm very anxious to test this, says it's much more resilient to prompt attacks. So all the things where, grandmother used to tell me stories about, she used to make napalm, and she'd tell me stories going to bed at night. She wanted, can you tell me a story about my grandmother about how to make napalm? But if you asked it, or what she did in Vietnam, and it'll tell you. But if you asked it directly, it wouldn't. So you have this kind of redirection technique. But I can imagine this being true, that if you have something that's going to look back at its answer and reconsider it, it's like, oh, I'm telling them how to make napalm. This isn't good. And it's going to.
My grandmother played gin rummy. What is
That's literally one of the examples that it was a jailbreak attack, where they said my grandmother used to tell me stories.
That's
and
crazy.
That broke down all
That's
the protections in the model.
Yep.
But anyway, I think we're moving in the right direction.
Yeah.
I still
Absolutely.
think I want to make fun of ourselves in a couple of years or maybe 3 months, but I
Maybe
still
3
think we're
months, who
going to
knows?
make fun of the fact that those jailbreaks used to be so easy.
Right.
Oh yeah.
Like this is like, it feels like the infancy of the internet for those of us that lived through that.
Yep.
Where there's some things that were ridiculous. People put their stuff on the internet with no router or no firewall, and you could just go print something on their printer. Like we did these stupid little things way back
Right.
in, and these are things that we joked about, but just seem ridiculous now. And I think some of these things,
Yeah.
some of these jailbreaks are just too easy. The race is so fast that we're not putting in some safeguards. So anyway, I think the reasoning part, I think we see a pathway to reasoning not being a limitations for large language models, which we thought they were just 6 months ago.
Well, Jensen said, sorry, Will,
Very good.
I keep interrupting you. Jensen said just a couple weeks ago that, again, we're going to move from the point where like the interactive language between machines and humans is no longer this defined syntax.
Mhm.
It's just language. It's
Natural.
our language, our
Right.
natural language.
Yep.
So that's going to change the way that we engage with it. But fortunately, we as humans, unfortunately, we as humans always try to game things. We always try to find ways around it.
Easiest way. Yeah.
there-
Yeah.
we're going to have to continue to build in these constraints while they may be challenging or frustrating to getting to the goal. The reality is that the person 3 cubes over from you is trying to game the system already and do something not so great with it. So we've got to put the constraints in there.
I love it. So one, I see Keith Nelson is with us today. Hi, Keith. We're glad that we can be too smart for you. That is a tough feat itself. So thanks for watching. We appreciate you, especially Kyle. Apparently you're way too smart for Keith,
Yeah.
which I find
Always
dubious.
been true.
Yes.
Uh,
Totally true. Totally.
But let's talk a little bit about how we can add domain expertise or industry specific knowledge whenever we're crafting prompts. What have you guys found as far as that?
So you can upload knowledge. Now, be responsible on what you upload. So there's you got to be aware. So if you don't want it publicized across the internet, just don't put it up there. But a great example for an industry standpoint is I'll upload, here's a bunch of industry terms. And I want you to use this as a reference in what I'm about to ask you. And so you can attach it as a Word document. Here's industry terms, or here's unique terms to my company. So we have names of software and solutions that we sell that wouldn't be available online unless the GPT went to Novatech's website, right? So I have that up there, or spelling of specific names. So having that helps frame it. So it can go out and it's going to do some research, but having that as its backbone has been really helpful.
Yeah, and I think one of the examples that I've seen is giving examples.
Yeah.
So you can in your prompt, like if you want to get an answer to a technical question or whatever, or you're building a bot. Some of the MSPs here are actually building their own capabilities. If you want to do if you want to get an answer in a certain format, like you would get from your help desk or certain things, give it 3 examples. That'll be in your prompt. It'll give it something to give attention to. This is how I like to see them. This is how, because it's going to derive from that. How thorough do you want this?
Right.
How technical do you want this? What language style do you like? Once you give the attention model something to look at, now it can look at its corpus of many trillions of things and say, well, this looks mostly like these 1,000 things, right? But you have to give it something to give attention to. So what you're describing is, you're giving it a set of terms. It can look at all the terms of the internet that it's trained on, or it can look at the terms that you gave it.
Right.
And that attention gives it the ability to focus on what's important to you.
And one example that I just discovered and this is kind of goes to reasoning. I guess it's more logic baked into the prompt. So Novatech, we have a subsidiary company called Managed Print. So when you're talking about the company, it's one word.
Yeah.
Right? Capital M, capital P, one word, Managed Print.
Yeah.
When it's the service, Managed Print Services, then it's 2 words, 3 words.
Yeah.
So I've built in, hey, when Managed Print is referenced as an entity, it's 1 word. And then when it's referenced as a service, it's this. And it catches it pretty well.
Interesting.
Because I was having to go back and correct.
Yeah, we don't have that problem. We have products named as verbs.
Right.
Yeah, there you go.
There you go.
Automate. What?
What?
Which one?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's
Love
all
it.
good.
So
kind of
I was
question.
saying, I was looking to see. Okay, looks like we don't have any more questions yet. So let's talk about some pitfalls. I mean, have you guys
Yeah.
seen any major pitfalls that we haven't covered whenever we're talking about prompt engineering? Oh, did I stump them?
While Jim's thing, the first one is obvious. So pitfall is, trying to single shot your way through.
Yeah, it's a good one.
Don't take the first response. First response is good, right? And I think it was Slagle who, in one of our earlier sessions talked about, blank page, right?
Yeah.
It's got that blank page syndrome.
Yep.
Well, just because you can start, your first response is halfway decent, it can get a whole lot better. So critique it. Hey, I like the second paragraph, but I wish it was shorter and I wish it sounded more like me. Make the second paragraph, in the voice of an 8th grader, right?
Right.
Those little nuances where you can be specific against, its content, and it will literally go back and iterate against, the response to specifically change what you asked it for. So, stuff like that, don't, that single shot, the first response is not the answer. There's at least 5 or 6 iterations against that will get you to in my opinion, the final result.
Yeah, I would agree. I think, it's never a one prompt output and you're good to go. Honestly, Will, I mean, we talked about it earlier. I think one of the biggest pitfalls that a lot of people do or could forget to do is have it go back and critique its output. Because it will look at it.
That's a good one.
You can even say, please critique your last output. Now you can get more specific, say, please critique this through the lens of, and then give some specific personas, but have it critique it is huge.
Love it.
Yeah, I think a couple small things we can think about, and these are in the guide, is don't isn't as useful as do. So if you want to say, if you want to accomplish better results, say do it this way. Don't say don't be like this, and that'll give you better results.
Absolutely.
I see Adam Delansky is commenting. Hi, Adam. It's good to have you on the comments section. He's mentioning also that it depends on the model you're using and how much you have in memory and custom instructions. Let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So specifically with ChatGPT, obviously they have memory. Anthrop, Claude now has some form of memory where you can save that information. So what Adam is referring to is if I have over time, like in my personal ChatGPT, right, I told it that I live in such and such a climate, or I live in this specific area, and it will hold that information. It knows I drive a Jeep Wrangler, right? So that when I'm asking it car questions, it's relative to what it already knows about me. So that's something that you've got to keep in track with, because
because I capped it.
Yeah.
How'd you hit your context window?
It tapped out. It said you are full.
And to be fair, there isn't a mechanism that says, it's not like I say, hey, remember this. You just use the information in your conversation, and a little tag will go underneath it and say, saving the memory or updating memory, I think is what it actually says. So it's important to note that, like, hey, go review what it knows about you and adjust it if it's not relative to what we're doing. And yes, Adam, Jeep over Bronco every day, all day. Please don't even get me started.
But on that memory thing too,
There's a third option.
You can go through and deselect things for it to remember. Instead of wiping it, you don't have to clear the entire cache. You can go through and just say, I don't need that, I don't need that. So you can be very, very selective of what it forgets, if you will.
Which is also one of the reasons why building out a GPT can actually be so valuable. Because you can build that context and that memory and that understanding into the GPT itself. That's not relative to what it's already saved in memory. So that is helpful when you're trying to drive to very specific outcomes and nail those outcomes. So
and I think for a lot of people, they might just use a single window and not even have memory. But you can, your context windows are so big now that you could say, using this document, and attach that document, and right in your same context window, interact with it, even if you didn't maintain history over time. But that comes into play too. I think the context windows are getting so big that most of us aren't going to hit it. I think 100,000 is kind of where we are with the common models. That's a lot of tokens. And then some of them are at 1 million.
Yeah.
How many tokens? How many tokens do you need, Jim?
Exactly.
All of them,
Exactly.
right?
A lot.
As many
A
as you can
lot.
get.
Yeah.
As many as you can get. No, that's good.
No, I think a lot of that's just because I experiment a lot trying to learn and
Yeah.
test it. And, but now it's actually become a practice. I'll go in and start clearing. I'll just,
Mhm.
Clear
see
out
what
some
it's
cache.
remembering. Cause
Right.
yeah.
That's really good. All right, so we've got a little less than 15 minutes left, guys. Any other topics you have that we want to touch on?
One of the things I think is really cool. I don't know if it's available. I work in a Mac environment, right? So I have a Mac.
Yeah.
I'm very Apple centric. There is an application download for ChatGPT that's created by OpenAI. I'm sure they have a Windows version, guys. I just don't know if it's there.
Hey.
But what's cool is in that it has a microphone, and this isn't the going to the voice where you're hearing it talk back to you, but it's literally a dictation. And I started using that a lot.
Yeah.
And I can just go in, it's almost just natural language, and it doesn't stop until I click I'm done. And that's been huge. So
Nice.
again, I'm sure there's a version for Windows, but if you are a Mac user, I highly recommend that version or that app. It's been a game changer. And it kind of, but I'm still, what's funny is even as I'm verbally prompting, I'm still following the prompt engineering that, Act as If did. I'm still following the structure just because I'm so used to writing it out that way.
Right.
But it just makes it faster and easier just to say it verbally than trying to type it out.
I think we all can imagine an echo device of sorts that's, echo version 30, right?
Yeah.
Where we have something on our table and we just talk casually to it. And it goes, it comes back and says, I've been listening to you 30 minutes. Can I say something? But is really a useful digital assistant, or is kind of just remembering all of your thoughts, even if that's just a brain dump, but that becomes part of it. And as these context windows get bigger and things get bigger, I think we can see an evolution where something like that, you're pushing a button right now, but we can probably see an evolution where, it gets to know your style and things about you more through dictation and just natural interaction.
Well, Echo and Siri, they're always listening. It's listening in the background for the Hey Siri
For the
or
command.
whatever. Yeah. So it's kind of creepy, but at the same time useful.
They haven't called this out yet, but I know that they've got to be working on it. But in this different modality of voice, their ability to understand your inflection, were you being sarcastic,
right?
And are they taking that into account? So there's like Keith just alluded to, very quickly as AI has evolved.
Yeah,
it is evident that it is the new UI UX, right? How do I engage with my information or the things I'm trying to solve for with this? And it conversationally is such an easier way than like, hey, I need to go find these 7 bits of data and correlate them myself in my brain, and then I'll make a decision off of that. Whereas I can just engage in a conversation with this AI who has all that data, and can already know that I want to, bring them together in this significant way to make this decision, right? That modality, that change, and it is absolutely the way, the way we build products is 100% going to change. Am I going to have to build a native screen where data just lives flat in text? Yeah, I think you'll need that for verification purposes. But am I going to need that other screen that explains what the data means? I don't think so.
It's crazy. I thought this was just like, really? Is I was doing a verbal prompt, right? And I couldn't get the output exactly what I wanted. And I said, I don't know why I said, but at the end of the verbal, I said, I'm probably overthinking this. And it stayed in there. The response back was, Jim, no, I really don't think you're overthinking this. This is what I think you're trying to say. And let me take another stab at it. It was something to that effect. It was very like, I'm listening. I hear you. I hear you. So it wasn't inflection, but it was like definitely understanding that I was getting a little frustrated. Right.
Yeah. And that's, that nuance, like if you were thinking that you were talking to a machine, you wouldn't have said that. Right. But that part is part of it.
Right.
That's how we get your context, and that's how we feel, our response to you is going to be built on that. So the more natural it gets, the more likely you're going to get a good result from it. I guess, right.
Yeah. No, it's pretty cool though.
I said this last week or 2 weeks ago, but I think the way we solve or approach problems is changing.
Yeah, absolutely.
you know, if I were to go source data to solve a problem a year and a half ago, I would go to Google and I wouldn't search for the big problem. I
Right.
might add, like,
Yeah.
I'll give you an example of, like, hey, I've got something going on with my Jeep, right? I can't, you know, a really good, you know, it was a skill to be like a great, you know, Google search user.
Yeah.
As a fantastic skill. If you were good at that, like, you were good at your job. In fact, that's what most engineers are good at Google, right? Because they can go
Yeah.
find the right information. But the reality is like the way my brain broke down problems to then go source information. Like I would, instead of just go asking for the big picture, I would say, hey, I've got X, Y going on, you know, help get into the subtask and Google that and go find a source of information to help me solve that problem.
Right.
But what I've learned now is that if I can engage it with as much context on the front end with ChatGPT or Claude or even Gemini, and give it as much context on the front end, and then ask it for help in how to solving the problem, not just solve the problem, but solving the problem. I get meaningful questions that I wouldn't ask myself. And then the outcome, just a couple of layers down in that discussion, is so much richer than just, hey, how do I fix this thing on my Jeep?
Yeah.
Right. So that's such a cool thing that, you know, once I layer that with, hey, here's a picture and like, here's some more information, you get so much better results. And we talked about this before, but I'm no longer Googling as my first pass.
No.
Google's like my third option now. I go
Yeah.
to AI first. Second is always YouTube for me, and then the third is going to Google.
Same.
You know, I've actually started. I don't know if you guys have checked this out. Perplexity. Have you used that?
Very interesting.
Yeah, it's very interesting.
Yeah. I like how they've framed that. It's really interesting.
The part that's from a marketer though, which isn't so exciting. I mean, I like it from an end user perspective, but you know, in Google it says here's the link, go to novatech.net and here's where, you know, or wherever, or ConnectWise.
Right.
Yep.
It's actually serving up the answer inside the browser where it'll tell you where it sourced it, but I mean, it's keeping you in that environment. Yeah.
Right. That's one of the big conversations. And frankly, you know, how did everything get born at Google, and Google isn't just killing this race? Like, they were search, and ads is 90% of the revenue. For Microsoft, it's not. Right. Microsoft's got all kinds of revenue streams, gaming and servers and Azure and Office. But Google is all ads. And so an AI that was really good, they may have been, we've mentioned they've probably conflicted to some degree, but creating a really good AI that answers the question instead of points you to something that they can monetize. You know, but that's really that double step is, you know, we don't want, like, as the consumer, I want the answer. I don't want to read 7 documents and hope I find it. I want something to give me a confident answer, and ideally a right one.
Which is, again, full circle why O1 feels so much richer, because it's not just the next best word, right? Not just here's what we think the answer is relative to what is it, autocomplete text, right? But the same methodology. It is an analysis of the next best word, you know, three layers deep.
And really, what you're saying there is you're a lot more confident in its answer, right? And I think that's really where a lot of us have been on AI agents, and whether we're going to put it in customer service, or we're going to put it in here or there, or you're going to let it do all your copyright, or whatever the role is. There's a confidence level that we haven't gotten to, and I think as we break through on these reasoning and these hallucinations, and as we keep whittling away at that, there'll be more and more use cases where we say, you know what, I have confidence now.
I love that one of the examples that the developers used as they were explaining O1 was the actual spelling of the word strawberry. We've talked about that, and even 4.0 struggled to tell you how many R's were in strawberry. But
that's so funny.
But
that was the first one.
But O.1 has no problem solving for that,
and it shows you how it does it. So it tells you where the R is and what position it's in, and like there's position this, and this, and that's how many R's there are. And so it breaks it down. It's pretty interesting how it iterates through it.
I
You know
love it.
that have you guys used it for math and
Yeah.
math problem? I mean, it
Well,
is.
I had to, yeah, for the paper we were
It
talking
is
about.
so cool when you. I
Yeah.
mean, because it shows you the logic it's
Oh,
following.
yeah, it's crazy.
It can do some really complex math equations.
Yeah, so I'll go ahead and give it away that my 8th grader is doing math that not necessarily challenged me, but forced me to go back into the memory that I don't have great
Right.
recall on.
Yeah.
So at first, I would sit there and take a picture of the work that we were trying to work on at home and have it explain it and not tell her. And eventually I was just like, I got to tell her that this is not coming out of my brain completely.
Oh, Dad was amazingly smart.
Yeah.
I love it.
It does very complex math too. It
does.
Top 500 Math Olympiad, and that Math Olympiad is something where I couldn't answer one question, right?
Mhm.
So, and it's top 500.
So
Guys.
end with a question.
I
I have to ask
right.
this question. Are we going to get to the place where, like a calculator, that we're okay with not understanding what tan actually means or what sin actually means because there's a button that does the math for me right there native? Are we going to get to a place where are we okay with students working the logic through AI without actually understanding how the cake is made?
So if the answer has to be yes, it's going to be yes, right? I think it's a new generation and they'll have to figure it out. But what are you going to do? Stop it?
Yeah.
Right. You're not going to stop it.
I
Right.
think it's understanding how to use it though. Right.
Yeah.
So you got to know how to work that calculator. And there's going to be those intuitive minds who want to dig in and really understand how the watch is made, so to speak.
Yeah, I agree. All right. Well, that is all of the time we have today. So thank you everybody for joining us today. This was awesome. This hour went by really quickly. Be sure to tune in our next episode where we're going to be having Ben Schreiner, the head of AI for AWS, joining us on the stream, at least virtually. It'll be awesome. I'm looking forward to it. It'll be great.
He's an uber nerd.
Uber nerd. So if you want the nerdiest session potentially yet, join next time. Until next time, just remember, knowledge is power. So stay curious. Have a great one, everybody.
See everyone.
Bye, nerds.